Sadly, another victim of the gray divorce. Many of us think as we age, we want to look forward to those golden years, those days with our spouse, to travel and enjoy the fruits of our labor of all those years. But unfortunately, we've seen massive increases since, about 1990, since about 2010. We've seen some big spikes. But on top of it, in 2019, about 36% of the divorces were actually people over 50 years of age. And by the time they were over 65, there was about 9%. Almost 1 in 10 were still divorcing, and they were in their wee years. Unfortunately, I had a conversation with a neighbor of mine here the other day, and he openly admitted that he was the victim of another gray divorce. It's sad. A lot of us put in those times, those years. We enjoy our time and the relationships. And the worst part is, it's the jobs, it's the careers. We get too focused. And when it's actually time to pull the plug, some of us find that shift, that change, is that shock. And a lot of us aren't prepared for that shock, where all of a sudden we've got more time, we're spending more time with each other. And certainly, this neighbor of mine shared a lot of his stories. But unfortunately, in a lot of ways, he didn't see it coming. He saw all the signs, but he didn't actually anticipate that it was going to happen. And now, sadly, his house is up for sale. But I've got a few signs that, once I looked into this, I realized that I don't want to fall that way. I love my wife. I want to spend time with her till the cows come home. I hope we can all basically just sit at 105 years old on a rocking chair and enjoy the sunset. That's ideally what I picture. And we have lots of plans of traveling and doing things together, and we always have. But there are, in fact, 5 signs that I've come across because I wanted to investigate this further. I had a conversation with my neighbor, and I dug into it to see what the things to watch out for, the signs, the symptoms, so you can prevent this sort of phenomenon from happening to you as well. Because, ultimately, we want to spend time. These are the people that we set out. When we had these vows initially, the thoughts were to be together for forever, pretty much. So one of the signs that I notice and recognize is emotional distancing. And a lot of people start to get that way after a while. We be honest. We feel sometimes as we age, we sort of lose that heightened sensitivity for anything. As we age, it seems like, it takes a lot more to shock us. It takes a lot more to entertain us, excite us. And it takes a lot more to initiate those feelings and emotions. But the same can go in a relationship. And a lot of times people realize that, we've been together for, 50 years, 40 years. And you think, okay, there's nothing fresh and nothing new and exciting. But what that tends to do is sort of draw down on emotions a little bit. And it's the lack of emotion that can lead. And see, it's a vicious cycle. See, because you don't feel as emotional, then your partner maybe doesn't feel as emotional. And this sort of ping-pongs and sort of spirals downward. The key to that, what I recognize, is showing the emotions, the care, the empathy, the feelings. If they're feeling hurt, you're feeling with them. And you know what? Just be a little bit more open to what their thoughts are and what they're feeling and going through. Because I've always believed as well, too, that you never really know what's going on in another person's world. And quite often, the best way to figure that out is ask questions, show that you care, but show those emotions as well that, you are also sharing in some of those feelings, whether it's good, bad. Be happy for them. Be sad with them, but ultimately be there in support. Another sign that my neighbor commented was he had mentioned that, the interactions were a lot more short, to the point. They were punchy and snarky and, sharp. And those comments often between spouses were not always the friendliest. They were always sometimes a little cynical and a little bit, agitated, it seems. And sometimes they get to the point where they don't even feel like saying anything because they feel like there's that agitation and that sense that they're just bothering the other person. See, this is another thing that I've realized that, we all get that. We all have good days, bad days. But if there's one thing that I figured out too, for myself anyhow, that kind of works for me, is, if I'm feeling snappy, if I'm feeling like I've had a rough day and I feel like everything's kind of getting on my nerves, I try to take a deep breath, count to 10. They even say, take a deep breath and exhale over a course of, say, 10 or 15 seconds. Quick inhale, slow exhale. And even do this a couple of times. Go in there, open arms, and be willing to listen, engage in conversation. Rather than being snarky and sharp, I find that can totally turn around an attitude. Everybody comes home at the end of a day, whether you're retired or whether you're working, and quite often things are busy, it's hustle bustle, somebody might have had a stressful day at work or driving in traffic. And sometimes it's just that calm, that sense, that slow reaction, that those easy discussions that can really set the tone and really improve the overall relationship. Another thing is sort of a sense of apathy. And, neighbors said that, they just stopped fixing things. They just stopped trying anymore. And that was another sign when both parties stop trying, when one's, there's a fight or there's a dispute or disagreement on something, and the sense is just, I don't know, I don't even care, whatever. You get that sense, and a lot of us kind of get that way. And it's human nature. After a while, you just don't want confrontation. You don't want to battle. You don't want to fight anymore. So a lot of times people just sort of give up. But it's that sense of giving up that is literally, and more than literally, it's metaphorically, but literally speaking, that's that sense of giving up. See, when you're fighting for, and I don't mean fighting, I mean internally, metaphorically fighting, trying to get that relationship back started, get past that dispute, have that conversation, open the dialogue again, find that sense of communication, and more importantly, compromise. Sometimes it's just a matter of compromise and having that discussion and saying, like, I understand how you feel. Those are great conversation pieces that are really all a lot of us need. And my neighbor said, the worst part is they just gave up. They would fight, and then they would be, they wouldn't talk for weeks. And then this went on. And unfortunately, this is what happens to so too many people. And when this happens, of course, this is again a downward spiral to, the unfortunate, the gray divorce, which seems to be impending these days for many, many couples. Another sign is when there's just less involvement with each other. The husband maybe goes and does all the stuff, hangs with the boys, goes to the bar, and we all like to have those moments. And I do believe that we all have to have those special moments and those alone times. But you also need to have a lot of things that you also enjoy doing together, and things that you like being around each other. And maybe you like to go shopping, and maybe you like to travel, and maybe you like to camp. I don't know, whatever it is. But there should be some things you love doing alone and some things you really love doing together. And that way you feel very fulfilled. But a lot of times, signs that you're sleeping in different beds, you're not even near each other. One person's watching TV in the living room, the other person's downstairs, and they're not even just involved at all with each other or when they're around the house. We know that a lot of times days, the career, the job is 8 to 10 hours. Then you come home and you still spend more time alone. Those are signs, and they can all be corrected. Remember, all of these signs, symptoms, and challenges can be turned around. Most of this can be corrected and, with some effort on both parts. Now, there are cases where there's just no fixing it, and sadly, that's the case. That's what happens sometimes. But a lot of it is just people giving up, couples giving up, or not paying attention, or not necessarily being sensitive enough to the other person's needs. But that idea of spending more and more time away, separate, those are also signs. Sometimes you need that downtime, but sometimes just being around each other is just a sign that you want to hang around. Have you ever seen, even animals? I've got a couple dogs myself, and they always like to sleep together. They're always hanging around. They're a couple of little French bulldogs, and they're the greatest little doggies, but they always like to hang around together. One runs off to one bed, and then the other one sort of follows suit. And then they often sleep there, head to butt, or they just kind of cuddle up. And it's funny, it's cute, it's very instinctual, but this is kind of what you've got to start thinking about. Back to basics, the instincts. But ultimately, spending more time with the other person, being more empathetic, listening, less reaction, less stress, and just more compromise all the way around are key ways to get past some of these problems. Another sign is very similar to one already I mentioned, but where conversations become very much transactional, where those discussions don't really have much meaning. A lot of times the conversations, did you pay the bills? Yes. And did you get your tire fixed? Sure. And it was just very to the point. See, the point is to have more open dialogue. But when you get to the point where your discussions are snarky, sharp, or even just very transactional because you don't want to be bothered talking to anybody. I get it. A lot of times, stressful days create that, but you've got to remember, sometimes it's just worth it. It's worth it for everybody. And the big thing is not just for you and thinking, okay, it's all about me. What I found as well is I try to put myself in other people's shoes and try to understand how they're feeling, where they're coming from. If things are grumpy, if things are, not looking nice on the surface, then I try to understand why that is, because there's probably a driving factor. Could have been a really bad day. Could have been a really nasty drive home. It could be maybe there's some health problem. Maybe somebody's not feeling well. At the end of the day, I try to understand what's going on in other people's lives. But these short transactional discussions are another signs that things are becoming a little bit more withdrawn, and certainly something that's worth attention. I've taken these signs as, kind of messages from other people who sadly have gone through some of these problems. And I use that. I use this as learnings to try to continue on my life's journey. And I love traveling with my wife, and we enjoy spending time with each other. And days aren't always perfect, but that's life, right? But we love each other, and we're trying to do the best for each other, look out for each other. We got each other's back. And ultimately, hopefully, that we're both 105 sitting on the rocking chair staring at the sunset. Anyway, I hope you all had a wonderful day, everybody. And be sure to drop a line. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on this. But again, as always, see you next time. Bye-bye.